Welcome to the second episode of The Swarm, a business and technology podcast brought to you by MyKrill. I'm your host, Wallace Chase. I'm a futurist, a lover of technology and its application in business, and I'm also the head of strategy and development at MyKrill. If you're not familiar with MyKrill, we're a very different type of consulting practice, and what makes us unique is that we're obsessively focused on our clients having what we call triumphant outcomes. Our expertise is ERP evaluation and selection, project management and project recovery, and custom applications. If you'd like to talk with us, you can navigate to our Contact Us page on our website and let us know when you'd like to meet. With me here in the MyKrill studio is an industry-leading business systems expert and an award-winning project manager who just also happens to be the domain expert for business systems here at MyKrill. And I'm very happy to have him with me here today. Jeff Skains, welcome to The Swarm.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Wallace. I'm excited to be here. I listened to your first podcast with Christy Cole, who truly is an ERP expert. She did so great, and it's going to be tough to follow in her shoes, but I'm glad to be here and excited to talk about the business system space and really what we're doing at MyKrill.
Yeah, and you're here now, and that makes me excited. So I want to talk to you about a lot of different things because we've had a few conversations earlier in the week, kind of in preparation for this, but not into too much detail. And we talked about several things. One of the things I want to talk about is your history. Just briefly, can you kind of walk us through some of the roles that you've had, how you've gained all this experience in business systems, and then how you ended up here at MyKrill?
Sure. So I'll say first, I started straight out of college with a computer science and business double major and started at Compaq Computer Corporation. So that dates me a little bit because it hasn't been around for a while, but started as a software developer and had an opportunity to really move into project management and really enjoyed it. I showed a natural kind of leaning towards leadership and kind of moving the needle forward on technology projects. And so we actually reorged, and I had an opportunity to kind of pick the development track or pick the project management track. And so I went down the project management track on purpose and really grew significantly at Compaq and then Hewlett Packard, living through the merger and all the changes that came along with that while I was there, and grew up in project management there to where when I left, I was managing a very large project of data center consolidation efforts where we had a large number of applications for my portfolio of the business that I was in, and we were trying to migrate those all into a data center, into a smaller footprint of data centers, and then was leading that, and then had an opportunity to move out to Southern California and moved into sunny San Diego.
Nice.
Probably one of the best places in America.
Nice.
And lived there for about 4 years working for a high-tech telecom company called Qualcomm. I worked on a number of different programs there in different areas, helped build out a PMO there, also had opportunity to work around Oracle ERP and a number of different projects in that space, as well as a FP&A project where we helped all of the financial departments and P&Ls across Qualcomm put together a forecast and how do they roll it up and how do they forecast at different levels if they're a really large P&L or a small P&L. So that was a really fun project. Did a number of other things there, and then had the opportunity to move back to Houston, Texas, where we are today, and work for General Electric and their power divisions around how do they take basically airplane engines and turn them into small power plants. And so there, I wasn't exactly doing program and project management, but what was really more of a functional IT leader around the logistics space for the business that I was in. And so kind of helped digitize and transform that, like physically took folks out of a 3-inch binder notebook of how they packed material into a digital process where they're scanning barcodes and things like that. So,
true digital transformation.
Yes, and that was a lot of fun. I got teased a little bit when I was there because I was out, steel toe boots, dirty jeans, dirty shirt, and a scruffy beard. But if you're out in the warehouse and out in a shop, that's really the only way to roll. But so really loved working there, and then moved into another program around sales and operations planning and helping drive the S&OP program forward, and really enjoyed that. And then I had one of the leaders that I worked with had moved over to United Airlines and gave me an opportunity to come work there. At United, my career really shifted from working around a lot of third-party applications to working heavily in custom software. And so I had an engineering team there of developers and architects and project managers and business analysts, and really had the full scope of some third-party systems, but really third-party systems that were heavily customized for the airline industry.
Got it.
And then also a number of custom software applications. The airline industry is really unique. There's not a lot of product you can buy off the market. So worked there for about 5 years, both in customer recovery side as well as the crew technology department. And so really enjoyed that. And then I had an opportunity to step out and kind of flex those entrepreneurial muscles a little bit and join a startup technology company. So I'm thrilled to be part of Micro. It's an honor that I was asked to come join the team and help build a company from the ground up. And we're having a lot of fun, and we're making a big impact for our customers.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. Most of the best consultants that I've talked to have a very, very wide swath when it comes to the systems that they've been exposed to, the different types of industries that they've worked in. It's not all just one thing. It's not all the power industry, or it's not, all just auto manufacturing or things like that. It seems like the ones that have the best understanding of the most processes and the most methodologies and can work easily with other consultants are the ones who have actually meandered a little bit, right? And it sounds like you've done that in a very strategic way. And it makes me think about a couple of things that are under your purview here at Micro. Walk me through a couple of things that you manage as far as what our expertise is in those domains.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I definitely have a broad background, and I think that really helps with the work that we're doing right now and what's in front of us with some of our customers. And, for me, that's exciting because I feel like where I have gone in my career and the different areas that I've been, I always kind of like to say, I can lead and deliver technology for any industry, for any function within the industry, and any technology. And
right.
I can say that confidently because I've done that. And there's some elementary core truths, I should say, around delivering technology that is industry agnostic. Now, there is a place to be said for very specific domain knowledge. And, we've got some folks like Christy Cole that we talked about earlier is definitely domain ERP. I mean, she goes very deep in that space. So there's something to be said for both of those camps. But
right.
That's certainly the path that my career has taken me. So what I'll talk about is a little bit about Micro as a whole and what we offer. So we've talked about ERP. We established that in the previous podcast.
Right.
And we've mentioned that. So we've got five business pillars: an ERP practice, an IT advisory practice. This is where we're talking about strategic planning. We're talking about onshore versus offshore resourcing. We're talking about cost efficiency and contract reevaluation, renegotiation with your vendors potentially, business case definition. So putting together business cases for projects and programs, and how do you get funding, and what does it take to do that? It's a bit of an art, not a science.
Right.
And so there is definitely some strategic role there. And then we're doing a lot of IT controls and governance, PMO, vendor management organization, those types of things. So that's our IT advisory part of our business. And then business systems, which you talked about, which that's where we're really getting into everything sort of almost outside of ERP. So what does that mean? Everything from web development. So we're doing some web development now for a few of our clients, but getting into business process, system design, CRM, build versus buy analysis when you're really looking at a unique system for a specific business or industry,
Right.
running implementations and integrations, that's custom development, reporting and analytics. So really anything sort of outside of that ERP space. Like for example, today we are running a Salesforce.com implementation for one of our clients. So that fits into that space.
Right.
Our fourth pillar is the digital delivery. So this is where we're going to do more digital assistant, RPA, bot automation, AI, machine learning. That's an area that we're looking to grow into and build. We're just getting started in that space today.
Okay.
And then lastly, the fifth pillar is what we're calling fractional IT leadership services. So whether that's a fractional CIO in a smaller industry or that's fractional IT leadership at really any level, VP, director, depends on the size of the company. But we've got not only in addition to our personal time that we have that we're investing in working with our clients, we also have a number of folks on our team that have that very senior level experience that we can pull in and do fractional CIO, whether it's for 6 months or a couple of months or a year, and for a large company while they're in transition into a new CIO, or whether that is a smaller business that needs some IT leadership, but they don't need to justify the expense of a full-time CIO.
Right.
So those are our 5 pillars.
Wow. And that's a lot. And, for a company that's been around for right at a year, right, that's a huge service offering. I want to talk about something specific, though. We're heavily into project management, but you mentioned something to me in the office the other day that I had to do a little bit of research on, and that's something that the industry standard now is calling project recovery. And we have a couple of those engagements going on. That's fascinating because I kind of want to know the difference between a regular project management engagement, right, where we would strategically go in and look at what needs to happen, talk to all the stakeholders, and figure out the charter and manage a project from start to finish. But project recovery is a little bit of a different animal.
It is, yes, it is different.
Yes,
there are some clear similarities, and the core fundamentals are the same, but you do treat them very differently. You also have sort of the preventative project rescue or project recovery efforts that you can take too, and we've got an engagement like that as well. But the way I look at it is really simple. Like, let's break it down into something that everyone can relate to. So there's a vast array of medical practices, right? So
sure.
When you think about the medical offices that you see around town, you've got the general practice doctor, right? So you go to a general practice doctor when you're getting a health check, right? You're having your blood pressure checked, your cholesterol checked.
Sure.
They ask questions like, are you eating healthy? Are you exercising regularly? What does your daily routine look like? It's really more of that preventative and kind of maintenance of your health and your body.
Right.
Then there's the emergency room situation, right? And so that's where something traumatic has happened, right? There's an accident, there's a car wreck, and there's a major medical issue. You go to the ER. And when you go to the ER, the first thing they do is triage you, and they try to figure out what is going on.
Right.
How do we fix it? What's the short-term fix? And if it's a situation where you need immediate surgery, you go into surgery. And then after you have surgery, you go through the physical therapy process, right? It's the road to healing or the road to recovery. And then once you get back into that recovered state, now you can go back to the general practitioner doctor where
right.
You're doing a regular health checkup on your body. And it's the same way with project management. So, before we go too deep into that, I want to say and acknowledge that if you're in a project recovery situation, that's okay. It happens in every company, in every industry, and any project manager truly worth their salt has been through a situation where there's trauma, right? Like, businesses change. companies are bought and sold. There's people that leave and change jobs that are critical resources on a project. So, it happens to everyone. And there's a reason why there's emergency rooms, at every hospital and popping up on every major intersection in every community across the country, because things happen. And when they do, you need an ER. And so that's how we've been kind of talking about project recovery, is when you're in a project and something goes wrong, what do you do? And so we have a process that we kind of call the micro heartbeat, and how we keep pulse of a project around project recovery. And we're doing a number of engagements like that, like you said.
Yeah. It's interesting because you think about a company that would say, hey, we need to go out to a consulting firm and hire a project recovery expert or team. And in reality, any number of projects could go south for any number of reasons, like you mentioned. Never in any of those scenarios, for instance, in your analogy where someone has to go to an emergency room, say they've been in a car accident or something like that, does the physician start to blame you for being there for any reason, or blame your car for having a blowout that sent you into a guardrail, which caused you to break your collarbone or something like that, right?
Yes. Yeah, it happens. And the doctor's not going to shame you, at least not a good doctor.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's a good practice, to have an oversight like a project recovery expert. In fact, I know that we just are, being asked now to look at a situation where there is no recovery yet. It's just a regular implementation of a fairly large ERP, but we're being asked to run ahead of the timeline, to look around the corners and look for the blind spots to prevent what could turn into a project recovery situation.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. I always like to say that in many of the projects and the companies that I've worked for, a lot of times you can get in there, and sometimes when you're in the heat of things, it's the analogy holds true, is that you can't see the forest for the trees, right? So if you're deep in the woods, you can't see the whole picture of the forest. And so bringing in somebody from the outside that can come in with an unbiased opinion, they can look at the entire project, whether it is an outsourced project with a third-party implementation partner, or it's an internal IT team, and your core business leaders, like someone that can come in from the outside and look at the project from an objective standpoint, sometimes can see things that you can't see. So, you asked me what the difference was. I think the fundamental exercises are the same. But what you have to do is when you come in on project recovery, it's that immediate triage situation. So in some of the projects that we've had, we've come into and said, what's going on with the project? What we like to do is meet with each of the individual stakeholders. And of course, we're going to start with the folks that brought us in, because they acknowledged that there was a problem and said that we need help. So we've done that, and we've come into the projects, and it's kind of like going back to the basics. We have to get up to speed with what the project is. And so the first question is, what's the business problem that you're trying to solve, or the opportunity that you're trying to take advantage of and deliver upon? And so you talk about that, make sure you have a good grounding of what it is that drove the project. Then you go through the basic fundamentals of a project charter, right? What's the benefit profile? If we meet this objective, if we solve this business problem, or we go after this opportunity and we deliver it, what are the benefits out of that? Are there financial benefits? Are there business process benefits? Is there revenue generating? Is there technical enhancements that are going to really drive the company forward? Like, what's that benefit profile?
Right.
And then you've got to talk about scope, what's in scope and what's out of scope. And what so many people miss is what's out of scope. I think that that's just as important to define early on as what's in scope. And the reason is that because it really clears up expectations. I've had more kind of leadership meetings and having conversation around what's out of scope by putting it in the out of scope bucket than I did by putting it on the in scope bucket. So it's one of those things that I think is often overlooked. And then what are your key success criteria? What are your metrics that you're going to measure success with? And at the end of the day, of course, you're looking at schedule and cost and resources, and do you have all of that in place to actually deliver the project? But what you need to do is get all of those key stakeholders aligned on what's the problem that we're going to solve, what are we doing about it, and what are we going to get out of it. And honestly, recently we were working on an engagement, and one of the business leaders said, if we do that scope, it will not achieve that business benefit.
So the scope on the original project was out of scope.
Well, I don't know if I'll say that, but I'll say if we had delivered that, it wasn't going to solve the objective.
I see what you're saying.
In his opinion. And so it created a really great conversation and to say, why not? Right? Why do you believe that this won't create this goal? Mm-hmm. And so as we talked through that, we were able to really define the scope, redefine the benefit a little bit for that program, and say, hey, let's put a roadmap in place. Yeah. And so it's not just about what are you doing today, but it's what are you doing next and after that and after that, and having this vision of a lot of the times these projects are, multi-generational projects. Mm-hmm. So we kind of do that, get our arms around what the project is, and then we ask the basic questions around, what does your project org structure look like? Who's your executive sponsor? Who's on the steering committee, who's in the working team, who is involved in the day-to-day, who are the ancillary stakeholders that need to be included as well. And a lot of times that's where stuff kind of goes wrong too, is you're missing those other teams. And we start talking about looking around corners and what's coming. Often there are problems that are caused in projects because they didn't have all of the ancillary stakeholders. And so maybe there's another technology department that's making changes that's going to impact you. Or maybe there's a business, key driver going on in another function that is going to impact this function, and that gets missed. And the reason that happens is because they don't have a holistic project org structure and communication plan. And so, again, we come in and we understand what the goals of the project are and how we're going to accomplish it. What's the operating mechanism with the folks that are involved in the project, and at every level. So whether it's from the top executive sponsor all the way down to these ancillary team members that maybe have a very small piece, even if it's just like they have to test or they help with the deployment or whatever it is, you have to make sure you have all of those right people in place and that you have a good communication plan as appropriate for that stakeholder.
And that's a very good definition and process run through of project recovery. And that helps me, and I hope it helps our listeners as well, because it's something that's unique in the industry. Not everyone has the expertise. And I'll go back to something that I said earlier. I think it helps that we have consultants that have taken different industries on in their career path and even use different methodologies, whether it be waterfall or, whether it involves having a scrum team or some of the other methodologies. Talk to me a little bit about how important it is to be able to walk into a situation without having any previous knowledge of what the original project and scope and charter was, or even the methodology that was being used to manage the project, and being able to insert yourself in a very, very meaningful way, gain trust very quickly in how you do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've been talking about really almost the basics of project management when you launch a project.
Right.
And I know some folks are probably listening going, that's basic. That's what you do on every project. I know.
Yeah.
But what happens is usually, even if it's done right and it's done at the beginning, if it's not managed appropriately as things move forward and things change and you aren't going back to that and resetting expectations, then you miss that. And so one of the things that we do is we come in, we get to know and understand the scope of the project, all those things that we talked about, but we try to meet with individuals one-on-one. So we try to take all of the core business leaders, all of the core technology leaders from each function and meet with them individually and try to understand from your perspective, what is this project going to do? And guess what? They're not going to have the project charter in front of you or the scope of the third-party implementation partners, SOW. They're not going to have the funding documents in front of you. They're going to tell you what they believe to be true. And more often than not, that's usually where we start finding problems, is that there's lack of alignment.
Okay.
Very early on. And it's very easy to identify, but it does take an element of building some rapport, building some trust with the person that you're talking about. And I think that's more about relationship management and building relationships with folks. We should probably take that down a whole other podcast. But, but you know, I like to think that I'm good with people, and I love talking to people, and I love getting to know people. And so for me, there is definitely an element of relationship building and trust factor, just like there is in any work product that we do, in any business that we do. Relationships are critical to success. And so we go through that process of meeting with each individual on the project and try to understand what's going on from their perspective. And that's usually where we can start identifying problems. Now, sometimes it's also much more obvious. Like, we had major team members leave, or there's something going on and it's late. Why are we so far behind schedule? What's going on? And I'll tell you, I brought in a project manager once on a really large cross-functional program one time. And I'm talking, 15, 17 different teams, huge org chart, very cross-functional program. And it was my team's had ownership to deliver the program. And we had our project manager leave, and I brought in a new project manager, still one of my favorite project leaders I've ever worked with to this day. So he came in, and within 2 weeks, there were some things that sort of happened in his first 2 weeks there. And I'll never forget this. He pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, Jeff, what's going on with this project? Do we not realize that it's not going well, and we're pretty far behind schedule, and we're not wanting to tell the picture to the executive steering committee, or do we not know that it's in a mess?" Yeah. And it was a
big difference.
There is a big difference, and it was just the happen that within the 2 weeks that he was there, like, a lot of that information kind of came out. So, I've been through that myself on my own teams where projects are kind of distressed, and sometimes you don't really know it. It's kind of like that ache that you might have when you get out of bed in the morning. You're like, "Oh man, my leg hurts," and then you get up and start moving, and eventually kind of you forget it's there, but you still have that little bit of an ache. We tend to ignore some of those little early symptoms. And so sometimes, again, just bringing somebody in from the outside that's getting fresh perspective can say, "Hey, I see some issues here." And so that particular project that I'm talking about, he mentioned it. And so he was right. And we just hadn't really kind of gotten our arms around with exactly what the impact was. We knew what happened. We knew that we were behind. I mean, we had teams that were working nights and weekends trying to get caught up. But it was when you have, 15 different technology teams coming together that all have their own priorities, and they may not all be your priorities. And so, that usually can create some conflict. And so it took us a little while to really get our arms around what happened, what's the impact, what do we do now, how do we course correct, and how do we ultimately deliver value for the business. And so if there's any project manager listening and you find yourself in this situation and you don't know what to do, it's bring your core team together and have an honest, transparent conversation. It's like you said at the beginning, like, you don't want to be the doctor that's saying you're late, right? That's your deliverables are not done. There's always a reason, right? There's always another problem, whether it's priorities across the organization, or maybe there's some technical complexity that we didn't anticipate. I've been through all of that. And so usually, like the project I was talking about, there was a very high priority program for one of the other teams that was a revenue generating program. And they had a much higher priority in their team for that project that had its own delays.
Right.
And so that sort of just trickled down. And then we had some technical complexities. I mentioned 15 teams. That's a big project, right? And so when you have those complexities, sometimes you underestimate things. And so I think where MyCruel can really play and really help companies that find themselves in these situations is that we can come in, evaluate the whole project, understand what the challenges are, and help you come up with a plan of recovery. Again, it's like that. Let's triage it. Mm-hmm. Let's stop the bleed, right? Get you into a sort of a life-saving situation, and then we'll work through that physical therapy process post-surgery, right? And then get you back into a place where you can get back into your standard monthly operating rhythm, your standard executive steering committee updates, your weekly statuses, your daily stand-ups, etc. But you have to go through that triage, that recovery of, stop the bleed, fix the major injury, and then move forward through a sort of a healing and recovery process to get to that healthy state.
I love the medical analogy because it makes so much sense. In fact, you've walked us through a very specific process and gave a lot of detail. What I would like to do for our listeners, if they're interested, is to put together this process on paper, right? And define each one of those processes, maybe post it up on our website at www.mykrill.com, mykrill.com. And then it's available there for people to be able to read about it and understand the process that we use here. You talked about the MyCrill heartbeat. You talked about some of the processes that we undergo when we enter into one of these types of project recovery scenarios. But I think it would also be good just to have our philosophy or our process on a regular project management. Every company is unique, and especially consulting company, has a different view of how they would like to run a project. So maybe I'd like to get that from you after this interview is over and be able to post it on our website, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. And look, we can help in project management. We've got some of those as well. Like you mentioned, we're working on an engagement where we're actually coming in as sort of an executive consulting to help make sure that they don't get into a project recovery situation, especially for that particular program. It's a really large ERP project, like you mentioned, and with a lot of scope and complexity. And so it's really great, and I think smart of that leader to bring in a third party. We're not the implementation partner.
Right.
We're not running the program.
Okay.
We're literally coming in just to help make sure that they are looking around the corners.
Yeah.
And so, you might think, well, that sounds kind of silly, but the reality is what we're going to do for them will help make sure they don't get into a project recovery point of view, because they just didn't have the full experience and exposure with this particular ERP system that they needed to have for this. And so we're coming in to kind of help guide and coach and make sure that they're able to deliver successfully.
I heard it explained this way, that when you engage with a consulting firm like MyCrill to come in and run that type of a position, that it's almost like buying an insurance policy, right? You're not going to start a huge project that's going to cost $1 million without thinking about adding an oversight or an insurance type policy. And it feels like that's what role we play in that scenario.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think so. And you say $1 million project, but with some of these projects, it could be a $10 million program
right.
Or much, much larger, right? Especially when you're talking about ERP. ERP is expensive anyway, especially if it's a tier 1 app. And then you start talking about all of the functions and everything that goes into it. So yeah, I think an insurance policy is a great example, and it plays right into our medical analogy that we've been talking about. So that's a great one.
I want to thank you again for coming in today. I know it took a little bit of your time. We're right at about 30 minutes, and I like to keep the Swarm podcasts right around 30, 35 minutes. To me, when I listen to a podcast, I want it to last from my front door to the office, and that's about 35 minutes. So I think a lot of people are in that scenario. So thank you once again for coming in, Jeff Skains, for opening up and talking to me about all the things that I was interested in, and hopefully helping our listeners understand a little bit more about what MyCrill does from a project management standpoint, but also what we talked about today, project recovery. So thank you for coming in.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to thank my guest today, Jeff Skains, the business systems leader at MyKrill. Thank you for listening to The Swarm, a business and technology podcast brought to you by MyKrill. If you'd like to talk with us, you can navigate to our Contact Us page on our website and let us know when you'd like to meet.